I gave him my kidney, and in return he gave my bedroom to his lover. I died crawling through the dirt to reach the mansion gates because he seized my phone and watched me suffer. But the universe gave me a second chance. But this time, I'm not alone. I've found the stranger who held me in the dark, and he's ready to help me take everything back. They called it a mansion. Everyone did. The journalists, the socialites, the distant relatives who only called when they wanted something. They would say, "Yan is so lucky, living in the Liu estate, can you imagine?" And I would hear it somewhere far away like a voice through water, and I would think, "Lucky, yes, that must be what this is." I lived in that house for 3 years. 3 years of white marble floors so cold they stole the warmth from your bare feet in the middle of the night. 3 years of ceilings so high that a voice, even a scream, would dissolve before it reached another person. The house had 17 rooms. I was permitted to occupy 2 of them, the smallest bedroom, the kitchen, to prepare meals. I was never invited to sit down and eat. They call it a mansion. I called it a grave I hadn't fully died in yet. I remember one particular afternoon, a Tuesday in late November, about a year after the surgery. I was sitting at the far end of the dining room table, not at the head, not even in the middle, at the very end, as if I had been placed there as an afterthought, a vase someone forgot to throw away. In front of me was a single bowl of plain white rice. No seasoning, no side dishes. I remember staring at it and feeling something I can only describe as philosophical. Here was the arithmetic of my life laid out in ceramic. One bowl, one person, one man who had decided with tremendous efficiency that I was worth precisely this much. My body was shaking that day, not from cold, though the house was always cold. It was the kidney, or rather, the absence of it. The place on my right side where something used to live, something warm and necessary, that I had cut out of myself and given to another man because I loved him. The surgery had been a year ago. Lu Chen's kidneys had been failing. The doctors called it critical. He had no matching donor on any list. I had gone in for testing without telling him because I wanted to surprise him. Because and I am ashamed of how long it took me to see this clearly, I was the kind of person who thought love meant quietly bleeding so the other person never had to notice the wound. I was a match. Of course I was. The universe has a vicious sense of humor. I remember waking up in the recovery room, the anesthetic still heavy in my blood, my right side on fire, and my first thought was, is he okay? Did it work? Is Chen okay? He visited me once, the day after the surgery. He came in, looked at the tubes in my arm, and said, "You look terrible." Then he checked his phone and left. He had a dinner reservation. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself he didn't know how to express gratitude. I told myself a lot of things in those days. I was very creative. And then, on that Tuesday, as I sat with my bowl of rice and my failing health and my frozen bank accounts, Lu Chen had frozen all 3 of them 2 months prior, claiming he was managing household finances, which meant he was managing them away from me. I heard it, the sound I had learned to dread, the click-clack at expensive shoes, and his voice, and another voice I didn't recognize. She was beautiful, or rather he was beautiful. Wei was the name. Wei, with the silk shirt and the easy smile, and the way he walked into a room like he owned the oxygen in it. He walked into my home, and he looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you're deciding whether to reupholster or simply throw out. Lu Chen stood at the entrance of the dining room, one hand resting on Wei's shoulder, so lightly, so casually, as if that casual touch cost me everything I had left. "Yan," he said, "don't look at me with those dead eyes. It's unsettling." A dead silence expanded in the room. Dead eyes. I suppose I couldn't argue. Something behind them had died some time ago, but I had not known until that moment that he could see it, and that seeing it produced not guilt, but annoyance. "This is Wei," he continued, his voice bright, as if he were introducing a vacation destination. "He'll be staying in the guest room. Actually," he tilted his head, reconsidered, smiled, "actually, he'll be staying in our room. You can move your things to the servants' quarters." Wei looked at me with that particular brand of pity that is not actually pity. It is a disguised form of triumph. "Oh, Chen," he said, drawing the name out slow and sweet, like pulling taffy. "Is this the donor you told me about?" Lu Chen made a vague, dismissive gesture. "He looks so sickly." Wei tilted his head, studying me with theatrical concern. "Is he contagious? Should I be worried?" I want to tell you that I said something devastating in response, something sharp and precise that cut them both down to size, that made them pale and scramble and reconsider every choice that had led to this moment. But the truth is, I coughed. A deep, rattling cough that started in my right side and rolled upward through my chest like a stone being dragged across gravel. I pressed my hand to my ribs and bent forward, and when it finally released me, I straightened up, and I looked at Lu Chen, and I said the most humiliating thing I have ever said in my life. "Chen, please." My voice was barely a voice at all, just breath wearing the costume of sound. "I need to go to the pharmacy. My side, it hurts so much. I can't breathe properly. I need my medication. Please, just let me." "Stop." His voice was a door slamming. "Stop using your sacrifice to guilt-trip me. You chose to donate. Nobody forced you. And yet every week it's Chen, I'm in pain. Chen, I can't breathe. Chen, I need something. You're not sick. You're lazy. You're dramatic. You're—" He stopped himself, smoothed his jacket. The mask of composure settled back over his face like water going still after a stone. "We and I are going out. Don't ruin our night." A long pause, shaking breath. They left. But before he walked out, Lu Chen came back, just once, just briefly. He crossed the marble floor, reached into my pocket, I was so stunned I didn't even flinch, and took my phone. "You spent too much time whining to your family. It makes you look pathetic, and it makes me look bad." He pocketed it. He turned away. I heard the locks engage from the outside. I sat at that table for a long time after. The rice had gone cold. The house had gone darker as the sun moved. I sat very still, in the way that animals sit still when they are conserving the last of their heat. And then, the pain began in earnest. It started as the usual ache, the chronic companion I had learned to live with since the surgery, the dull throb that told me I was asking too much of a body that had already given too much. But this was different. This was something tearing. This was something fundamental going wrong, the way a structural support gives way not all at once, but in a long, creaking sequence of small failures. I stood, the room tilted. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone—" Another cough tore through me, and I caught the edge of the table, and the bowl fell, and the white rice scattered across the marble floor, and I thought, absurdly, I should clean that. I called for the maids, twice, 3 times. Silence. They had been told to ignore me. I know that now, though I only suspected it then. They were good employees. They did what they were told. I understood in that moment, slowly, the way you understand things when the mind is trying to protect itself from the full weight of a truth, that I might die here, in this house, on this floor, alone. The hallway outside the dining room was dark. The automatic lights had not come on. Perhaps Lu Chen had turned off that circuit as well, one more small economy of cruelty. I lay on my back for a while, staring up into the dark, breathing through the fire in my side, doing the math of my situation. The nearest phone was gone. The nearest door was locked from the outside. The front gate was 80 meters away, down the main hall, across the entrance foyer, and out across the circular driveway. 80 meters. I don't know when I decided to move. I think the decision was made somewhere below thought, somewhere in the animal part of me that was not yet ready to simply stop. I rolled onto my stomach, I put my hands flat on the floor, and I began to crawl. Marble is cold. I don't think people understand how cold marble can be until they are pressed against it with their entire body, when there is nothing between it and your skin but a thin cotton shirt. It pulls the heat out of you with a kind of patient efficiency that feels, in your lower moments, almost intentional. My fingernails. I remember my fingernails. I was trying to find purchase on the smooth stone, trying to pull myself forward, and there was no purchase to be found. The marble was seamless and indifferent, and at some point I realized my fingernails were bleeding, little red smears on the white floor. Evidence. I do not know how long it took. My mind has collapsed that time into something merciful and impressionistic, flashes of pale floor, the distant glow of the security light above the front door, the way sound seemed to be coming from underwater. 3 hours. That is what the security footage showed afterward. 3 hours to cover 80 meters. By the time I reached the front gate, I could no longer feel my fingers. I reached up and wrapped them around the iron bars, these decorative, expensive, useless bars, and pulled myself up to something approximating sitting, and I leaned my face against the cold metal, and I thought, with tremendous clarity, I am going to die here, against this gate, in this driveway, and no one will find me until he comes home, and when he does, he will be annoyed about the mess. Headlights. Bright and sudden and so shocking that I flinched, pressing my face harder into the iron bars because I had grown so accustomed to darkness that light itself had become startling. A car had stopped in the road, and someone was running. I couldn't see his face. My vision had narrowed to a tunnel, and at the center of that tunnel were hands. Large, warm hands pressing against my face, my neck, checking for pulse with a kind of focused urgency that told me this was not a stranger performing a social obligation. This was someone who genuinely could not walk past a dying person without intervening. Some people are like that. I had forgotten they existed. "Hold on," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath the control there was something I recognized dimly as fear, not for himself, but for me. "Stay with me. I've got you. I've got you." He lifted me, and I want to be precise about this because it matters in a way I didn't fully understand until later. He lifted me, the way you lift something fragile, the way you lift something you don't want to break. For the first time in years, someone held me as if I were worth the care. Isn't that the most devastating thing? That it took me dying to be touched like I was precious. I felt the car moving. I heard his voice, on the phone, clipped and urgent. "Adult male. Collapse. Possible internal hemorrhage. We are 7 minutes out." And I tried to hold on. I genuinely tried, but there is a threshold in the body past which trying is simply no longer the operative variable. My last conscious thought was not of Lu Chen, not of the house, not of the years, not of the kidney I had given away for nothing. My last thought was this: I don't know his name. I wish I knew his name, so I could thank him. In another life, if there is one, I would like to say thank you. I opened my eyes. The ceiling above me was not hospital white. It was the familiar plaster and hairline cracks of my old apartment, the one I had lived in before Lu Chen, before the house, before I became someone's convenient sacrifice. Morning light was coming through a window I recognized. I sat up. June 10th. I grabbed the phone on the nightstand, my phone, not the one he had taken, and I checked the date 3 times because the mind will reject certain information no matter how clearly it is presented. June 10th, which meant the surgery was 7 days away, which meant Lu Chen's kidney failure was still only a pending catastrophe, which meant I had been given something that people dream of and no one actually receives, the chance to do it differently. I lay back down. I stared at the ceiling, and in the space of approximately 4 minutes, I made every decision that needed to be made. First, I called the hospital and canceled the pre-surgical consultation. The nurse on the phone sounded confused. I told her there had been a change in the donor's circumstances. I used the most professional voice I possessed. I felt nothing but a clean, clear lightness, like a house after all the furniture has been moved out. Second, I called my bank, All three accounts, the ones Lu Chen had not yet frozen, because in this version of events, he had not yet had the opportunity. I transferred the money, I closed the accounts, I opened new ones under a separate institution, under a name he did not have access to. Third, I called the lawyer I had always been too afraid to call. You want to know what regret tastes like? It tastes like the moment you realize that the courage required to save yourself was always there, just buried under someone else's constant insistence that you were too weak to use it. Lu Chen called me at noon. His kidney pain was already worsening. Without the preemptive treatments I had always quietly arranged, his condition was advancing faster than expected. His voice was tight with pain and tighter with entitlement. Yan, the hospital says you canceled. What are you doing? We had an agreement. I considered for a moment how to respond. I had a great number of options available to me. I could explain, I could argue, I could give one of those long, quiet speeches in which I listed every specific cruelty he had ever delivered, cataloged and dated. Instead, I said, "I'm sorry, Chen. I think you have the wrong number." A cold, precise exhale. You know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wasn't there more to be said? And the answer is no. There was no more to be said. Everything that could be said had already been said in that dark hallway, pressed into the marble floor, bleeding from my fingernails. The speech had already been delivered. He had simply not been present for it. Now came the collection. The gala was in 4 months, Lu Chen's annual charity event. The one he used to court investors, build goodwill, maintain the facade of a successful, upstanding businessman. He had been planning it for 8 months. I knew the venue, the guest list, the caterers, and the name of every single investor he was hoping to secure. I also knew the other things, the things I had discovered in his study late at night during the first year of our marriage, when I was still trying to understand the man I had married instead of simply accepting the evidence in front of me. The shell companies, the diverted funds, the correspondence with Wei that had begun, and here is the detail that still makes something cold move through me, that had begun 14 months before my surgery. He had already chosen Wei before I gave him my kidney. He had already decided I was a means to an end while I was still lying on an operating table, voluntarily giving him a piece of myself. I had all of it. I had kept it because I had not known what to do with it. And now I knew. The night of the gala, I arrived 40 minutes late. This was deliberate. By the time I walked through those doors, the room was full, the drinks were flowing, and every eye that mattered was already present. I wore a suit the color of deep water, dark blue, almost black, with a subtle structure that required no accessory and no explanation. It had cost more than Lu Chen's monthly car payment, and I had paid for it with money I had earned, which is a distinction that mattered very much to me. I saw him across the room before he saw me. He looked diminished. The kidney failure was progressing. The treatments were no longer keeping pace with it. He had lost weight in the way that is not flattering, that tells you the body is paying its debts from the inside. He was working the room with the slightly feverish energy of a man who knows the clock is running. Then he turned. The color left his face in a single, clean movement, like a tide going out. Yan! He crossed toward me, and I watched him recalibrate in real time, the practiced charm reassembling itself over the shock, his voice dropping low. "You're here. We need to talk. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. The surgery." "Lu Chen?" I smiled. I had practiced this smile. It was pleasant and perfectly empty, the way expensive hotel lobbies are pleasant and perfectly empty. "You look unwell. I hope you're taking care of yourself." "Don't do that. Don't. Yan, I need you. You're my husband. Whatever happened between us, you have to." I leaned in, close enough that only he could hear me, and I said, quietly and without any drama whatsoever, "Husband? I don't have a husband. I have a debt collector. And tonight,
I'm here to collect. I had a contact at the AV desk. He was professional and quick. The presentation appeared on the screen behind the quartet, which fell silent in confusion, and within 30 seconds, the room had the focused attention of 200 people who understood they were watching something significant happen. The documents were very clear. They had been prepared by a forensic accountant and reviewed by 2 lawyers. The shell companies, the fund diversions, the years of embezzlement from partner accounts, and the correspondence, not all of it, just enough, just the parts that established the timeline, the parts that showed the surgery was a transaction, not a sacrifice, that he had chosen his replacement before I had even finished recovering.
I watched him. I want to be honest about this. I watched him the way I had once crawled across that floor toward a gate he had locked, with total and complete attention, because some things deserve to be witnessed fully. He was begging, explaining, reaching for arms that stepped back. I watched the investors turn away, one by one, with the brisk finality of people updating their calculations. I watched his business partner take out his phone and make a call. I watched Wei, standing at the edge of the room, assess the situation with those sharp, practical eyes, and quietly retrieve his coat from the cloakroom. I watched a man's empire, constructed on the borrowed infrastructure of someone else's body and someone else's silence, come down. And then I put down my untouched glass of champagne, and I walked out. A pause. When the voice resumes, something is shifted, the cold precision softening by a fraction, warming at the edges. I want to tell you something about revenge, since you're here for this part. Everyone imagines it will feel like fire, like standing in a burning building watching the arsonist catch. But it doesn't, or at least mine didn't. It felt like setting down something very heavy that I had been carrying for so long I had forgotten I was carrying it. It felt like relief in the shape of a quiet Tuesday afternoon. And then, fairly quickly, my mind moved on. Because I had another debt, a different kind. One that had been sitting in my chest since the last seconds of a life I no longer had to live. I spent 3 months on it. The license plate had been captured by the estate's security camera, the system Lu Chen thought he had disabled but had only partially disabled, because he was a man who cut corners whenever he thought no one was watching. I had the footage. I had a partial plate number. I had a description, dark car, late model, and hands. Warm, precise, careful hands. The investigator I hired was very good. She found him in 11 weeks. Huo Shuang. I read the file 3 times before I went to meet him, not because I didn't believe it, but because I wanted to understand him before I stood in front of him. 41 years old, self-made, known in his industry for a kind of exacting competence that made competitors nervous. Privately, known for something else. He donated to a homeless shelter every month, not a publicity donation, a quiet one. His name wasn't on the building. He had stopped his car for a dying stranger on a dark road and held him gently while he lost consciousness. And then, because he was this precise kind of person, he had made sure the stranger reached the hospital and then dissolved back into his own life, asking for nothing. I walked into his office on a Wednesday afternoon in early spring. The room was not what I expected, not the monument to wealth that Lu Chen's office had been, all glass and statement art and surfaces you weren't meant to touch. This office was lived in, books with actual spines cracked from reading, a plant on the windowsill that had been watered recently, a desk covered with work. Huo Shou looked up from his papers. He was not what I had imagined in the dark of that car in the last moments of my first life. But then I hadn't imagined features. I had imagined a quality, and the quality was correct. There was a steadiness in his face, a kind of settled attention that made you feel when he looked at you that you had his full presence rather than a fraction of it. "Can I help you, Mr. Yan?" I had prepared a speech, several drafts of it, in fact, laid out on my desk at home, revised over 3 months. They all felt wrong now that I was standing here, too structured, too rehearsed. Too much like I was performing something rather than saying it. So I set the speech aside. "You saved someone once, not long ago, a man at a gate late at night. You stopped your car." He was quiet for a moment, thinking back. I've helped people in moments of crisis, he said fearfully. Why are you telling me this? I thought about the floor, the marble, the 3 hours, the cold hands becoming warm hands at the very end. Because he didn't get to thank you, I said. He wanted to, but he ran out of time. Huosho studied me. He was the kind of person who looked at things directly rather than from the side, and I found, unexpectedly, that I did not mind it, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at with interest rather than calculation. And so you're here on his behalf? He asked. I'm here on my own behalf, I said, because I think the gratitude got confused with something else, something I'd like to explore, if you're amenable. He laughed, not the polished social laugh I had learned to be suspicious of, a real one, small and caught off guard, as if the universe had delivered something unexpected to his door and he found he was not displeased by it. That, he said, is the most unusual thing anyone has said to me in this office. I have been told I'm unusual. I'm starting to see why. He set down his pen. He looked at me with that steady attention, and this time it held a question, and the question was not, what do you want from me, but something more generous than that. Something closer to, who are you, and is there time for me to find out? Sit down, Mr. Yan. Tell me about this person who ran out of time. There are things I did not know were possible. I want to say that plainly, without poetry, because the truth is plain enough to not require decoration. There are things I genuinely did not know were possible, because I had never encountered them before. I had no reference point for them. I had to learn what they were from scratch, like a language you begin studying in middle age, slowly, with great attention, with the particular joy of someone who arrives late to something beautiful and is simply glad they arrived. Huosho brings me flowers on Tuesdays. This sounds simple. It is not simple. It is the least simple thing I have ever experienced, and I have had a kidney removed in the service of an ungrateful man, which objectively should be less simple. But the kidney removal, I understood. I understood the mechanics of sacrifice, the geometry of giving until you are empty. What I did not understand, what I had never understood, was the mechanics of being given to. He never asks what kind I prefer. He pays attention. The first week it was sunflowers, because we had been talking about summers in the South. The second week it was something small and pale and fragrant I couldn't identify, and when I asked him, he looked slightly pleased with himself and said, "Gardenias. You mentioned once that your grandmother grew them." I had mentioned it once, in passing, 3 weeks prior. He had filed it away. He had acted on it. I am still learning how to receive this. He walks on the outside of the pavement, every time. I noticed it after the third walk we took together, and I asked him about it, half joking, expecting a dismissal. Instead, he looked at me with perfect seriousness and said, "There's more vehicle traffic on the street side. It's a basic precaution." As if this were simply obvious, as if keeping me a few centimeters further from harm were a baseline consideration rather than an exceptional gesture. I had to turn away for a moment. He asked if I was cold. I said I was fine. I was not fine. I was in the process of recalibrating something fundamental. I heard about Lu Chen in March. The trial had concluded. The charges were financial fraud and misappropriation, corporate penalties, not criminal imprisonment, but the reputational damage was irreversible. His assets had been frozen pending settlement. The company was in receivership. He had applied for a matching kidney donor on the National Registry and had been waiting for 8 months, which is not unusual. Which is in fact what happens to people who do not have someone who loves them enough to carve themselves open on their behalf. I heard this and I felt, let me be precise, I felt the thing I expected to feel, which was a cool, quiet satisfaction. And then, rather quickly, I felt something else. I felt finished. Not vindicated, not triumphant. Finished. In the way a chapter ends. In the way you close a book and set it on the shelf and turn to look at the rest of the room. It was a Sunday in late April that I understood that I was happy. I was sitting in the garden, Huoshuo's garden, which is the size of a small park and smells in the morning of cut grass and whatever those yellow flowers are called, the ones that grow along the south wall. He was beside me, reading something on his tablet.
his shoulder very lightly pressed against mine in that way he had of being physically present without being demanding about it. A cup of tea was cooling on the table in front of me. The light was doing what light does on good mornings in late spring, arriving at an angle that made everything it touched look more deliberate, more considered, more worth looking at. I was not shaking. My side did not hurt. No one had taken my phone. No one was going to come through the door and rearrange the furniture of my existence without asking. I turned to look at him. He was already looking at me. He had the slight, private smile of a person who has been quietly watching you arrive at something and did not want to rush it.
"What?" I said. "Nothing," he said. "You just looked settled." "Settled," I repeated. "Like you'd decided something." I thought about the word, about the marble floor and the iron gate and the warm hands at the end of a road that was supposed to be the end. A life in which I had been so accustomed to being the person who gives that I had forgotten there was any other mode available to me. "I want to protect you," I said. It was the same thing I had said in his office all those months ago, but it meant something different now, bigger, more specific. "I want to—" I stopped, tried again. "I think you spent a long time making sure everyone around you is safe, and I want to be the person who does that for you, who notices, who pays attention." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and put his hand over mine on the table, very gently, the way you place something you don't want to disturb. "I think," he said, "I've been waiting for someone to say that for quite a long time." The sound of the garden, the bees, the light, the silence of two people who have found their equilibrium. I think about that version of myself sometimes, the one on the floor, the one moving inch by inch across cold marble, bleeding from the fingernails, toward a gate that was locked against him. I think about him with a tenderness that surprises me every time I encounter it, because he was, by any measure, in a terrible situation of his own making, or at least his own allowing. But he was also the person who refused to give up, who kept moving, who reached the gate, who, in the last few seconds of his life, thought not about his suffering, but about the name of the person who held him. He was the person who, when he got another chance, used it with both hands. An announcement sound on his phone, quickly silenced, life continuing. Lu Chen called me once. After the gala, after the trial, after everything. His number came through on a number I hadn't blocked because I had stopped thinking about him often enough to feel the need to. He called from a hospital room, according to the investigator I was no longer using for anything related to him, whose report I received nonetheless. I looked at the phone for 4 rings. I put it face down on the table. I picked up my tea. I looked out at the garden. Huo Shou glanced over. "Anything important?" "No," I said, and I meant it. In every possible sense of the word, no, not important, not anymore, not ever again. The sound of the garden, the season turning, something that sounds quietly like a beginning. A final, settling breath. People talk about karma as if it's a punishment system, as if the universe is maintaining a ledger somewhere, balancing cruelty with comeuppance on a 1-to-1 ratio. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe Lu Chen in his hospital room waiting for a kidney that may not come is part of the accounting. But that's not the part I think about. That's not the part I carry. What I carry is this. I crawled 80 meters across a cold floor, and at the end of it, at the very gate I thought would be the end of me, there was a man who stopped, who chose to stop, who held a stranger gently in the dark and said, "I've got you," not as performance, not as transaction, but as simple human truth. I spent a whole life learning how to give everything and ask for nothing, and in my second one, I am learning, slowly, some days better than others, always with his patient and unhurried help, how to let someone carry some of the weight. How to sit in a garden on a Sunday morning and feel the sun and not be waiting for it to be taken away. How to be held like I'm precious and believe it. Karma didn't just take away my pain. It brought me to the man who was at the gate, who was, I think, going to be at the gate, who I just had to get there to find.
The end.